everybody, and welcome to today's Sunday sermon, which happens to be on the second Sunday after Easter. It's also known as Low Sunday. And why? Well, the Gospel is an account of the lack of faith initially of St. Thomas, who demanded that he touch and put his fingers even into the wounds of Christ, the 5 wounds of Christ, before he would believe that he had risen from the dead. So traditionally it's known as Low Sunday for that reason. It's also known now as Divine Mercy Sunday, and I'll explain that later because they somehow tie in. Let's go back to St. Thomas, who failed to believe because he couldn't touch and see the wounds of Christ. Touching and seeing, and the senses, in other words, are what we mostly rely on to convince us of the truth. And it can be a mistake, and it can be a good way of knowing the truth too. But there are other ways of knowing the truth. For instance, intellect teaches us to understand mathematics, understand outer space without actually feeling, seeing, or touching, or smelling in any way what we believe is there. So faith is the one thing that bridges that gap. Faith is seeing with faith. Is very different from seeing with the senses. But it doesn't mean that what we are seeing or that what we are saying is not true. So our intellect tells us that there was a great change in the disciples and the apostles especially after the death of Christ, and the reports went out that he had risen from the dead. These people changed completely, and the early Christians showed that they had experienced something very special, because some of them even sold everything they had and gave to the poor and brought to the community of believers to spread it out and give it to the poor people. And this was something extraordinary and dynamic and something that's unbelievable really. But we see it happening. Our minds, our intellect, we read that and we say, our intellect tells us something must have happened. They must have experienced something. We say that was they met Christ. And you meet Christ, you don't have to be back in those times to see him. You meet him now in your present day life. And for us, this is the message. We can meet Christ. We can meet him in our prayers and the sacraments especially. And many people do. We can meet him in the events of our lives. Things happen and we prayed. And somehow we found the graces to accept. And maybe we were healed and maybe relieved or rescued from various situations. We can also experience life. We can experience Christ, the risen Christ, in the good works that we do, provided we do them on his behalf and in his name, because God has been merciful to us. Now we go to today's second theme, the one of divine mercy. The whole divine mercy movement, it is a movement, or I think I can call it a movement, that has begun. And it's only in this last century, the 20th century, that it began. And in a woman by the name of Sister Faustina. Sister Faustina was a Polish young person growing up in Poland in the early 20s, in the 1919, around there, 1905 in fact, she was born and baptized. And she lived her life and she had an experience of She lived in a very poor family. Father was a carpenter, and she, at a very young age, had to go out and support the family by working as a domestic helper and worker. And she had this vision or feeling that she should give of her life to the Lord. And she found a group of sisters, and they were known as the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy. And in 1925, she joined them. Found it very, not strict enough in fact, but she stayed on with them. And she experienced spiritual dark night of the senses, even when she went in there, which is a kind of an experience that happens to a lot of people who become saints later. They experience darkness. The same Mother Teresa experienced darkness and even lack of faith. But she persevered and went through that, and she was made a sister. And in 1928, on Good Friday, she was engulfed by the flame of divine mercy, as she called it. She was engulfed. Sometimes after great darkness, maybe this thing can happen. There's a great sense of exhilaration and joy, but also realization of a mystical event. And this is what happened to Sister Faustina. Faustina then had visions, and she was told by Jesus to go to an artist, a certain artist, and describe for him how her experiences happened. And she did so. And the artist drew a painting, which we all know now these days. But Faustina wasn't happy with that painting. But he listened to her, and then this is what he came up with. And you will know that painting. It's with Jesus and the flames of love coming out of him. And he's standing up like this. So Faustina, that was simply it. On July 1934, Faustina began to get sick. And on September 1938, she prepared herself for death. That was 4 years later. She prepared herself for death. She died on the 5th of October 1938 after receiving the sacraments, including confession and begging for mercy from her sisters in the congregation if she had hurt them in any way. Between 1940 and 1941, the Divine Mercy message becomes famous and popular among the victims of the Second World War. On the 6th of March 1959, Rome bans the Divine Mercy devotion. But on April the 15th, 1978, the prefect of Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith declares the notification ban no longer binding. In other words, they had lifted the ban. On the 30th of November, Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope, wrote an encyclical based on the Divine Mercy spirituality. On the 30th of March 2000, Sister Faustina is declared a saint, and the Divine Mercy Sunday is proclaimed. This feast falls on today, the second Sunday of Easter. The message of Divine Mercy is the need for us all to turn to the mercy of God as the answer to the specific problems of our times. Imagine if all of us forgive one another, there would be no wars like what's going on now at the moment. There would be no disunity and injustices and inequality if there was real mercy in the world. So there is a need to pray for mercy to be experienced all over the world and beginning in our hearts. May God bless you and help you to have a lovely Easter, and also that the mercy that is proclaimed by this devotion to the Divine Mercy may become a reality to your life and to the whole world.